You're listening to KNON 89.3 FM in Dallas, the voice of the people, voted best radio station for music 2 years in a row by the Dallas Observer.
Did you know that KNON podcasts all of its local talk shows? KNON has local talk, each show covering your community in its own unique way. So if you missed one of our great morning talk shows, you can go back and listen to it online. We keep the shows for 2 months so you can hear everything you have been missing out on. Visit KNON.org for more information about the KNON Morning Talk Shows podcast. Also available on iTunes.
What a game! What a game!
Jim Schutze here with Get Off My Lawn. Good to be back. Good to have you back. I want to talk to you this week about something that I wrote in my column, my weekly column in the Dallas Observer. Get Off My Lawn here on KNON is the KNON community radio version of a feature I write every weekday on the webpage of the Dallas Observer. The webpage is called Unfair Park. There's a lot of confusing geography to cover here. So here I am on KNON doing Get Off My Lawn. Get Off My Lawn is the KNON version of Get Off My Lawn on the webpage. But I'm talking this week about a column that I wrote in the actual newspaper, or as we now call it, the print product. The thing printed on paper that you find in boxes all over the city. My column this week is under a headline called Bad to the Bone. You've heard the phrase, when good people do bad things. My column's not about that exactly. It's more about when bad people do bad things. And this topic takes us to Newtown, what I find the media refer to as the tragedy at Newtown. Somehow the word tragedy sticks in my craw. Tragedies I think of as things, terrible things that somehow can't be avoided. I think of Newtown and the slaughter of children there as a catastrophe more than a tragedy. But the column refers to Newtown and also to the first of these kinds of gun slaughters of kids that penetrated the national consciousness, which would have been Columbine in Littleton, Colorado, April 20, 1999, when Dylan Klebold and his friend Eric Harris shot and killed 11 students and one teacher. The column also goes to a place you might not think of, in the same vein, Hollywood, Florida. And I go there because I'm talking about a story I covered for a book that I wrote in the mid-'90s. It was published in, I think it was 1997, by HarperCollins, called Bully. It had to do with the murder of a young man named Bobby Kent, who was killed on July 15, 1993, in a kind of a swampy area, an unreclaimed part of the Everglades, west of Hollywood, Florida. Hollywood is about 17 miles north of Miami on the Atlantic coast. So in this column in The Observer, I'm tying these three things together in a topic that I want to talk to you about today. And I hope that you will call me, interrupt me, and share your own feelings about this. I'm at, I'll give you the number repeatedly as we go along, but it's 972-647-1893. Call me up. This is the topic here is sort of an attempt to get at how we view these events and how we explain them to ourselves. I find that there's almost a reflexive tendency on the part of most of us and on the part of kind of popular culture to come up with two kinds of explanations for these events where young people do horrendous things. One is that it must have something to do with the parents. Where were the parents? There must be something wrong with this young person's family life, or they wouldn't have done something this horrendous. And then the other kind of goes directly into a more kind of psychiatric, psychological explanation. There must be a diagnosis here. In order to do something like this, and this is a phrase I hear all the time, these kids to do something like this were crazy because only a crazy person would do something like that. And I question both of those assumptions in this column that I've written, and I'm going to question them again in talking to you about it here this morning. My starting point for writing about this was actually an essay that I read by a New York writer, Andrew Solomon, who's got a new book out called Far from the Tree, in which he talks to mainly Tom and Sue Klebold, who are the parents of Dylan Klebold, and talks to them, and I haven't read his book, I haven't seen it yet, talks to them at some length about their family and their son, Dylan Klebold, and what they think happened. I came across an essay by the writer, Andrew Solomon, the author of this book, on the Daily Beast online, and he was talking about working on the book, and he said that it took him a long time. The Klebolds, the parents of Dylan Klebold, one of the murderers in the Columbine incident, those parents have never talked to anybody much before they talked to Andrew Solomon. And he talked them into sitting down for lengthy interviews. And he said in this essay about it that he assumed, why did he want to talk to them? He assumed that in talking to the parents of this mass murderer, that he would uncover secrets that would explain the murder. He'd find out, well, what was it in this kid's background? What was it in his family life? What was it pointedly in his parenting that led him to become a mass murderer? And he said an interesting thing in this essay. I'll read it to you. He said, "The better I came to know the Klebolds, the more deeply mystified I became. Sue Klebold's kindness, before Dylan's death she worked with people with disabilities, would be the answered prayer of many a neglected or abused child, and Tom's bullish enthusiasm would lift anyone's tired spirits." This reporter, Andrew Solomon, said that after getting to know the Klebolds, he said, quote, "Among the many families I've met in writing this book, the Klebolds are among those I would be most game to join." So in other words, instead of coming up with the answer to why this kid did this terrible thing, he found himself even more mystified because these parents of the kid seemed to be such great parents. And their being great parents kind of stumped him because it deprived him of this explanation he was looking for why the kid did what he did. And that's what we're going to get to. Call me up. I'm at 972-647-1893. I said in my column that this essay really struck me because I had gone through the same thing in working on my true crime book in 1993 about the Bobby Kent killing. Obviously, I was working before Columbine, and the Bobby Kent killing actually got a lot of national publicity, and the main interest in the story had to do with the fact that the 7 people who killed Bobby Kent, some of whom were total strangers to him, some of whom were his best friends, were 7 young, white, suburban kids. I say kids, they ranged in age from, I think the youngest was about 18, up to early 20s, from kind of suburban middle-class backgrounds. And so the big mystery, supposedly, was how could this happen? How could these kids from these good backgrounds have done this terrible thing? And I realized, after I spent a couple of years researching the book before I started writing. When I got to the end of the research, I realized that I had started into this thing with exactly the same assumption that Andrew Solomon did in talking to the Klebold's about their son's role in Columbine. I believed that if I looked closely enough at the parents, I would find out why the kids did what they did. I was also, and I talk about this in the column, under a lot of pressure to come up with a story that sort of didn't blame this crime on the murderers. That will seem unbelievable to you, but I swear that's how it is. This murder was, the one I wrote about, was just unspeakable. I can't even, I can't even go into a lot of how it happened here on the air, but I can tell you that they lured their victim out to the swamps, they slit his throat, they disemboweled him, they threw him into the Everglades, still alive, hoping that the alligators would finish him off. He was actually nibbled by crabs, and he did die. It was a horrendous killing. And so I figured the same thing. I had the same question everybody else did. How could these kids from these backgrounds do this? And my assumption was that the answer lay somewhere in an investigation of the parents, and I spent 2 years doing that. And what I came up with was the fact that some of them were bad parents, no question. There were some terrible parents in there. Some of them were really great parents. They were, the best kind of parents anybody could hope for. Most of them were just what I'd call parents. They were the same sort of trying to do the best they can, people going for a batting average that I have always seen in the mirror when I looked at myself as a parent. You're up at bat all the time. The kid's throwing those spitballs at you. You don't expect to hit them all out of the park, but you hope for a good average. I came to the conclusion in my book that there was no way that you could blame this on the parents or even explain it by the parents. You could if you focused on just one parent, because as I say, in a group of 7 kids, 7 sets of parents, you could find a couple really bad ones. But then you had to explain the kids who came from great families and had every break. They were Little League. They were raised in the church youth group. They had karate lessons, ballet lessons. They had all the stuff that middle-class people do for kids, and they had devoted parents, some of them. And I just, couldn't... There was no way you could come up with a thesis by which the parents were to blame for this. Now, as I explained in the column, nevertheless, I was under a whole bunch of pressure to blame it on the parents. First of all, from the book editor. This was a true crime book. True crime is not the most elegant or elevated genre in the book business. Some people might call it sleazy. I balk at that word. My books were published by, I did a half a dozen of them, and they were all published by major trade publishers, but I will say that true crime publishing is not pretty. And there's a lot of, it's commercial book publishing. And so there's a lot of focus on target demographics and that stuff. The target demographic for this book that I wrote that came to be published under the title Bully was young adults. And the editor, who was herself a young adult, I think she had been out of someplace like Vassar for about a week before she achieved the power of life and death over me. She kept saying that she thought it would be a mistake for these characters, as she called them. I kept saying they're not actually characters. These are real people, but she called them characters. And she said it won't help the book if they're just disgusting, if they're just evil. And she said repeatedly, they can't be evil because they're young. And at first, I think I sort of went along with that, or didn't think too hard about it. At some level, I accepted that idea. They can't be evil because they're young. So anyway, I had this pressure from her, not to blame, to find a way to put this on the backs of the parents. And as I go along with this, I've said it a couple times already this morning. Call me up, 972-647-1893. This is a discussion of why young people are capable of these horrendous acts like Aurora, Newtown, Columbine, and the one I covered in the mid-'90s in Florida, the Bobby Kent killing. The book I wrote was extremely attractive to movie makers as a movie project. It did eventually get made into a very small independent movie, kind of quirky, weird movie by an artist whose name is Larry Clark. But it went through half a dozen major studios who were interested in making it a big movie. And I wanted them to make it a big movie because then I would have gotten a big paycheck. I never got that big paycheck. There's a rule somewhere in heaven that says if Jim Schutze is involved, no big paychecks. But it did go through these various iterations, these 6 big deal movie studios who looked at it. And there, the pressure to blame the parents was overwhelming. I see we're coming up on a break. In the next segment, I want to explain that because I think it's an important piece of this puzzle, the way popular culture deals with evil. Jim Schutze, get off my lawn. We'll see you back here in a minute.
Sonny Bryan's Catering presents
the 14th annual KNON Blues Festival on Saturday, January 26th and Sunday, January 27th to Poor David's Pub. Join us for the biggest blues event of the year, starring the Royal Rhythmaires, Bobby Patterson, Blues Boy Bo, the Aaron Burton Band, Andrew Junior Boy Jones featuring Kerry LaPie, Pete Barbeck and Seventh Son, Bonafide Blues, Deep Ellum Rhythm Kings, the Dallas Blues All-Stars featuring Hash Brown and Mike Morgan, the KNON Blues Review with J-Max, Sonny Boy Mark, and Jeff Stone, Big Charles Young, the Drew Lane Band with special guest Sir Loin, and the Super Kings. This is the big one. You never know who's going to show up and play as a special guest. Don't miss out on this big blues show. Advance tickets are only $15 and are available now at knon.org, Bill's Records in Dallas, and Forever Young in Grand Prairie. This is a KNON Blues benefit event.
KNON thanks Sonny Bryan's Catering for their support.
Hey, baby! Want to hear some great Texas blues? KNON has the CD for you. KNON's Texas Blues Radio Volume 5, our latest blues compilation CD to benefit community radio, sponsored by Forever Young Records. This CD features 15 tracks and 60 minutes of great original Dallas-Fort Worth blues from Tutu Jones, Blues Boy Bo, Buddy Whittington, Andrea Dawson, Kirkland James, Sonny Colley, Johnny Red and the Roosters, the Chris Watson Band, the Two Tones, the Rough Cut Blues Band, Jeff Stone and Charlie Love, Dave Millsap, Sirloin and the Ash Kicking Machine, Michael J. and the Paul Bird Band, and JJ and the Detonators. We're only selling 1,000 copies and it will never be reissued. Get your copy now at Forever Young Records in Grand Prairie, Recordtown in Fort Worth, and in Dallas at Bill's Records and Rewind Music. The CD is available as an MP3 download at knon.org. All proceeds benefit community radio, KNON. For more info on Texas Blues Radio Volume 5, visit us at knon.org. Get your copy now and hear some real Texas blues. Your ears will thank you for it.
If it's time to get rid of your old gas guzzler, the KNON Vehicle Donation Program can help. There is still a market for those old vehicles, and if you donate it, you are helping to support the quality programming here on KNON. Just call 877-KNON-AUTO or go online to knon.org. We'll take care of everything from pickup to tax paperwork. That's 877-KNON-AUTO.
Jim Schutze with Get Off My Lawn. Call me up at 972-647-1893. We're talking about Columbine. We're talking about Newtown, Aurora. And I'm also talking about some experiences I had back in the 90s writing a true crime book about a murder that involved a group of young people. And just before the break, we were starting to talk about how popular culture deals with these things in America. The book I wrote in the mid-'90s was a paperback called Bully, about the murder of Bobby Kent in Florida in 1993. And that book went through a bunch of iterations as a movie property. People who thought they wanted to make movies out of it, none of it worked out. But it went through half a dozen big studios. And that process was really illuminating to me. What I learned was there's no movie project, there's no movie until there's money in the deal. It's just a bunch of people talking. And there's no money until you get a star to agree to play the lead role. And to get a star to play the lead role, you got to have a lead role that a star would like. My problem was that the lead people in my story were all absolutely detestable. They were horrible. And so they weren't the kind of characters that a star like, say, Drew Barrymore or somebody would want to be associated with. So there was all this pressure to change the deal, to change the characters, to make them less objectionable, even though they were murderers. And it was always called character development. We're going to explore their motivation. But what it came down to was character excuses. You had to come up with some kind of excuse for why this kid did this. And I'll get into how that worked in a second. I see we got Michael here on line 2. I don't want to keep him hanging forever. Michael, how are you this morning?
All right, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
I ain't nothing. It's just interesting. You know, I always just ask a question that, why all these mass murderers just happen to be white people?
That's very interesting, although it has a lot to do with focus.
I'm wondering, does it have a lot to do why they wanted you to try to whitewash it?
Well,
because, I mean, I believe none of y'all writers got instructions to try to, you know, write stories that would take the blame off O.J. Simpson.
Right. And, Michael, I think you're coming to maybe the point that I'm working toward. Because a lot of it has to do with how you start looking at the story at the very get-go. If you say to yourself, okay, we have a kid on the south side of Chicago who shot 5 other kids, but he's a gang kid. He's a black kid. So that's not a story. That just happens. But then you say, let's say the same editor, you say, well, wait, now we got a kid in Florida who killed his best friend, and they were white kids. And now that's a story. That's a mystery. Why would a white kid do that? You've already created, before you do one lick of reporting, you've already created this setup where it's significant because it's white kids, and it's not significant when it's black kids.
So the Florida story, so there were some white kids that killed the white kid, huh?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
well, also the idea that there has to be some mysterious reason for it. And the other piece of it, and there's a little phrase that sneaks into it that nobody ever thinks about, but it's interesting to look at. People will say, these were children from good backgrounds. Were they? The kids I looked at in Florida, I mean, what do you mean a good background? You mean a rich background? Of this group of 7 kids I looked at in Florida, some of them were from rich backgrounds, some of them were from poor backgrounds, some of them were from very orderly families, great families, some of them were from dopehead families, terrible families. But one of the things you would conclude if you looked at them as a group was there's nothing especially good about the background of being a white suburban kid. Why is that good? Why are those kids from good backgrounds?
Well, I mean, you know, I guess if you got money, you know, Americans are some of the, you know, to me, you know, they are some of the most gullible people, you know, it is, you know, and
right.
I guess they think if you're rich, you know. I mean, I like gated communities, you know, like that boy out there in Arlington that killed his mother and sister in that gated community.
Right.
I'm glad that gate kept his sick self in there, because he could have killed somebody else.
Yeah.
And I'm saying his mom and sister would never believe that he was capable of doing that.
Right.
So he showed them.
Well, Michael, will you? I got another caller I need to go to, but will you hang on and keep listening, because I want to get to what I think is your point.
I'll keep listening.
I'm working my way there. Thank you for calling.
Yes, sir.
And before we jump back into it, let me pick up Sandra, who's been waiting on line 3. Sandra, you there?
Yes, Mr. Schultze, how are you?
I'm good. I'm sneaking by.
Oh, okay. I wanted to read on the sale of KKDA and Willis Johnson.
Oh, Sandra, I don't know, and I'm sorry. That's too far off my mark. I'm trying to cover a different story here. Let me come back to that.
Well, can you do this? Can you do this for me then?
Right.
I am out of town.
Right.
And I'm not able to listen to your radio. I just called in.
Right.
So I don't know what mark you're trying to reach, but now you know, he who from a fight runs away comes back to fight another day.
Uh-huh.
So I would love to jump in on your mark if I know what it is. So what is it that you're trying to reach? And then maybe I can give a comment on that.
Well, we're talking about Newtown and about the Aurora killings and about why these murders are explained in the way they are, and why they're explained in psychological terms rather than moral terms.
Well,
you're out of town. Where are you?
You do understand that it doesn't make a difference. I can't pick up your radio station.
Okay.
But what the psychological term, it has to be addressed in that, Jim, because those people who are committing these particular crimes that we talk about are functioning with an altered mind.
Well, I'm gonna disagree with you, but I'm sorry you can't listen to the show. I'm going in a different direction, and I got to get there. I got to let you go. I thank you for calling.
Well, what
Sandra.
direction are you trying to get on?
I'm headed north. Thank you for calling, Sandra.
Get off my lawn.
I wonder what town Sandra is in at this moment. Anyway, that's another matter. Michael was maybe edging toward where I want to go with this. When I worked on this thing as a movie project, the pressure was huge to blame the parents and to say there are these middle-class doofuses who don't understand their kids. They're all probably a bunch of hypocrites. They're probably all into a bunch of dark stuff we don't know about, and that's why their kids are crazy and they did this stuff. It just so happened that I spent 2 years looking into all of that in these instances, and I had to tell the movie people that's not true. That's not true. They're not a bunch of hypocrites into dark stuff. These are not characters, by the way. These are real people. They have access to the courts. If you make a movie saying that they're responsible for these murders, I think they'll sue you, and I'm going to volunteer to testify on their behalf. And that was why my movie project never went anywhere. We'd get to that point and they'd say, this is over. Forget about it. And then my very astute and able agent would go out and sell the thing to another studio, and we'd go through the same thing. But here's the question. Why would there be this great pressure not to blame the murderers in these specific instances? Or when I say blame, maybe this is some semantic, splitting hairs, but we're going to explain the murder without what I would call blame. I think of blame as a moral concept. You did it. It was evil. You did it on purpose. You're responsible. The blame is on you. And you don't have a guilt trip. You have guilt. You're guilty. You're an evil person. It just strikes me that we have a huge reluctance in the culture to do that. Now, Michael brought up an interesting wrinkle on this. When we say we, who do we mean? I was dealing with white editors and development people, and we were talking about white kids. I think there's way less reluctance if white editors and developers are talking about black kids or Hispanic kids or some other ethnicity. Then it's easier to say, well, they're no good. They're wicked. They're evil. They're bad. That's why they did it. But when the same people are talking about kids who look like them, who look like their own kids, there's this huge, I would call it, excuse-making mechanism that comes into play. And there's this idea, and I go back to what my book editor told me. She said, they can't just be evil, they're young. Well, why do we assume that? Look, if we believe in free will, that we are all endowed with free will, then we believe that at that age where we get the capacity to distinguish between right and wrong, then we have the ability to exercise our free will to do what is wrong, to do what is evil, no matter what kind of parents we had. In other words, the parents are not deterministic here. The kid still has the ability to choose to do evil, even with the best parents. Let me pause again and call me up if you're listening to this. I'm at 972-647-1893. 972-647-1893. We've got David on line 2. David, what's on your mind this morning? David, are you still there? I see you blinking on line 1, actually. No? Line 2. I can't. I'm sorry, David. I'm not. Try us back if we lost you. Why do we have this reflexive tendency to want to say, okay, the guy in Aurora has to be a nutcase. The kid in Newtown, people started saying he was autistic. Well, A, that's not known. B, so what? What does that have to do with doing what he did? And what is, it doesn't sound terribly autistic to me that the kid destroyed the hard drive on his computer first, assembled the weapons and planned it all out. That doesn't, I don't know, that sounds pretty rational to me. Why do we need to explain these people as crazy why do we skip over the possibility that they chose to do evil? David, are you back on line 3? I'm giving Cliff too much to do here. He's fielding the many calls coming in, and I just don't want to miss David on line 3. Are you still there, David?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. David, how are you this morning?
Good.
What's on your mind?
I still think that if the person's chemical imbalance is not sending the right signals, that's the reason why they couldn't plug this and that, and some people feel an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth.
Right.
And somebody did him wrong, so he felt like taking it back out on somebody else.
Well, I understand, David. Your voice has an uncanny similarity to the voice of Sandra, but I could be wrong. I thank you for calling. I'm going to jump to line 4 to Elliot. Elliot, are you still with us?
Yes, sir. I'm still here.
Elliot, what's up?
Hey, I just happened to be roaming through the radio stations, and I heard you talking about this issue. I thought it was very interesting.
Huh?
And I gotta say, I agree with you. You know, everybody is so quick to want to blame their parents, but my mom has 5 kids, and everybody grows up differently.
Right.
You know, you have the kids that are responsible, then you have the ones that go astray for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It's easy to blame the parents because you can put a face on something.
Right.
But, and I think, just like you also said, it's so quick to, people are so quick to want to blame mental illness.
Right.
But in my profession, I'm a law enforcement officer, and I deal with people with mental illness a lot.
Right.
Now, people with strong mental illness, they don't normally hurt other people. The reality of it is, some people are just evil, and that, in my opinion, that's just the reality of it.
And if you're in law enforcement, you're forced to look at that. You're forced to see stuff. I'm sure you search your heart sometimes and think, how could that guy have done that? And tell me if this is true. There must have been times where you decided the only explanation is evil, right?
It's true. I mean, I hate to say it, but, you know, I totally, you know, I deal with mental illness. I see it on a day-to-day basis, and I know that mental illness is real, but most of the people that we see doing these violent acts, in my opinion,
right,
they're not on any kind of medication. There's no, you know,
right,
there's no chemical imbalance. There's just something in them that's making them evil, and there's nothing that anybody can do. They can be from a loving household where people are hugging them and kissing them and loving them,
right,
but, you know, there's something just wrong with them.
and it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but what's wrong is morally wrong, right? I got a break. Hey, listen, thank you very much, Elliot, for calling in. Porter, don't go away. We'll be back in a minute.
Texas, a program of the Texas Health and Human Services Commission, is committed to helping Texas citizens connect with the services they need. Whether by phone or internet, our goal is to present accurate, well-organized, and easy-to-find information from over 60,000 state and local health and human services programs. We have programs ranging from child care to GED instruction, from dental care to food pantries to public utility services. Contact 211 at 211texas.org or dial 211 to connect with the resources you need. If dialing 211 directly doesn't work on your telephone, you can call 877-541-7905 for 211 Texas. Don't let your family go without the help they need.
I'm Ranger Rita.
And I'm Action Annie.
And I'm Rockin' Robin. And we're here to tell you that the Magic Time Warp Show has moved to Monday morning, 7 to 9 a.m. on KNON.
Tune in every Monday morning, 7 a.m. for the best 50s music you've ever heard.
Right here on KNON, the voice of the people.
Hey, babes, take one.
Jim Schutze, back with Get Off My Lawn. Did Elliot hang with? I'm sorry. Did Porter hang with us on line one? Let me, Porter. Before we do anything else, let me ask you how you are and What you got to tell us this morning?
Oh, I'm good. Well, you know what? I watched this episode go down, like the Muslim guy, that's the military guy.
Yes, the guy in Colleen.
He didn't get the crazy pass because he was an Arab, and I don't know if you remember this story, man. About 10 years ago, it was pretty big.
Right.
Colin Ferguson, the guy who shot 22 people on the subway in New York, who wound up defending himself in court.
Yes.
This guy never got the crazy pass either. It's like if you're I don't want to. I hate the racist type of thing, but it's like if you're a white kid or a white guy who commits a heinous crime like that,
right?
They got to give you the mental card off the top.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, the national debate is going from guns to the national debate on mental health. I'm like, come on now, that's not a debate we need to have. We know that crazy people are everywhere, but if a guy shoots 13 people, and if he's black, he's considered a murderer,
right?
A butcher, just an evil person. But if he's considered a nice white kid from the suburb, most of the time this is what's happening, then they get the crazy pass off the top. I'm like, come on now.
And if you talk to any cop who worked, we had a call from a cop a minute ago, but if you talk to any cop who worked those suburban streets, he would say, what do you mean, nice white kid? You know, because they see kids all day long that are nothing but bad, and they're white.
They even they diagnosing the kid, never been diagnosed.
Right.
They give him first. They give him the what do you call it? Autism.
Yeah.
Card.
Yeah.
And then they pull out the Asperger's card. Like he's never been diagnosed in any of this.
Right.
And that's crazy.
And it wouldn't explain anything anyway. And the point I'm trying to get to and working my way toward is that what it really expresses is an absolute reluctance to consider the possibility that these kids are evil. And the kids I wrote about in Florida who murdered one of their best friends, I spent 2 years looking into it, and at the end of the 2 years, I decided these are just the kind of people that prisons are built for. These are bad guys. And that's why they did what they did, and they didn't just do that, they were in the bad life. They did lots of bad stuff.
Well, you know what's disheartening, Jim, is the fact that, okay, they're coalesced around these kids, but they consider that this is one of our own.
Right.
But are we still in the place where one of our own can be considered Latino, Black, Asian? It's always like the Asian guy that shot up the place over at Virginia Tech. Mm-hmm. They didn't give him the crazy pass either.
Right. Well, you're right that the crazy pass is mainly for white kids. It's just
we're supposed to be all one family in America, where every young kid or every murderer coalesced around him too. But you only get coalesced around the whole country unless you're a white kid. They consider he's got to be crazy because that's not what we do.
Yes.
And those are the most murders in the country are done by people with these guys' MO, with this guy's personality.
Sure. And some of it, I mean, maybe a little bit of it you can blame on naivete, people who aren't around a lot of violence and so on. They don't get why somebody would do it. They don't understand that people do it because they like doing it. They like doing it. Evil is its own reward. The problem with that explanation is they're only naive about it when it's a kid who looks like their kids.
Yeah, I think it's part of being you're a little ashamed that one of yours did this. You know, it's this forever.
And you don't want. You know what got to me when I was working on this thing in Florida? These kids were teenage to early 20s, and I was the father of a son at the time who's about, I guess, about 6 years old. And I'd go work on this project in Florida for a month or so, and I'd come home at night. And I've always got home late, and I'd go up, in my kid's room. He'd be sleeping. And I would get tears in my eyes thinking, these kids in Florida I'm writing about are exactly the kind of kids my boy is going to grow up with. They are exactly the same kids he's going to go to high school with, he's going to hang at the mall with. And how do I protect my kid from them? And in some weird psychological way, people think they're protecting their kids by pushing evil away from themselves and saying, well, kids like my kid can't be evil. And that's, you want to talk about something that's crazy, that's crazy. If people can be evil, then all people can be evil. Evil is universal. And I thank you for calling. Thanks very much for your thoughts. And anybody else who's out there this morning and has thoughts about it, call me up at 972-647-1893. It's 972-647-1893. When I got to the end of working on that book in Florida, I got really curious about why. Okay, what is the answer? What is known about who commits crime? And that gets you into a very interesting area of criminology and sociology, because the social science people have been working on this thing hard for 20 years. They've been looking. In fact, it goes back farther than that. If you go way back to the 19th century, people looked for what they called the criminal class. They wanted to know, who are criminals? Where do they come from? At least that way we'll know them when they're coming. We can identify them. And early on in sociology, their thought was, well, we'll go to prison and we'll count up the people there, see what they're like, and that way we'll know who the criminals are. Well, if you count up all the noses in prison, then your conclusion is, oh, criminals are mainly African American and Hispanic, because they're way overrepresented in prison. And then other social scientists said, well, wait a minute, that doesn't work if the criminal justice system is racist. If you're putting people there because you're racist, and prison is a school for thieves, they learn how to be criminals there, then you're not getting at the causes of crime. You're just getting at a reflection of racism. And so a huge amount of work was done by all kinds of different people, competing projects to look at the criminal justice system. And that came up overwhelmingly saying, yeah, the system is racist as hell from the get-go. And look, they know what they're doing. They know how to look at this. They'll take a kid here who's rich, his parents can afford lawyers, he's from a big family, and he's white. And they'll take another kid, he's rich, his parents can afford lawyers, he's from a big family, but he's black. And they do the same thing, and they go into the same court system. And what the studies found consistently was the black kid gets slammed and the white kid walks, relatively speaking. So what they said was, you can't find out who the criminal class is by counting noses in prison, because that's reflecting a skewed system. And so they found other ways, ingenious ways, to go out and find out, okay, who commits crime. And one of the first things they had to do was get away from adults, because that sample is skewed by society and racism and everything, and just look at kids. If we can identify the kids that are disposed toward breaking the law, then we will identify the criminal class. And over 20 years, these research efforts and experiments and studies in the United States and Canada have come back very consistently saying that there is no criminal class in that sense. The tendency as a child to break the rules, to break the law, is exactly the same in all groups. It does not have to do with race or ethnicity. It doesn't have to do with education. Everybody will say, well, we need to educate. The answer is education. Actually, no. That doesn't answer the problem of crime. It's not money. It's none of the above. And so what is it? And that's the point at which the social scientists, because they got to keep their white lab coats on and be scientists, they sort of give up. But you know where you are when they bring you up to that point. You're at the fence and you're staring over into the field of morality. That's what makes the difference. Some people exercise their free will and their moral choice to do evil, and some people do not. And most of us probably do a little bit of both. But we try to, again, go for a good batting average. if you look at a family with 13 kids, and this goes back to my point about the parenting, anybody who's known families with lots of kids knows that they can have 13 kids, and out of the 13, they can have 2 or 3 really great ones. They can have a bunch in the middle who are kind of average, and then they can have some real stinkers, and they all came from the same parents. So that would argue the parenting is not the decisive factor. What is the decisive factor? Well, the decisive factor is that we're born with free will. We're born with the ability to exercise moral choice. And if you believe that, if you believe that we have free will, then it is a necessary corollary of that as soon as a child develops the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, the child gains the capacity to choose wrong, to choose to do evil, in spite of good parenting. I'm not saying parenting isn't important, please. It's very important. We all understand that. I'm saying that it's not the end-all and be-all decisive factor, nor is psychiatry. You know, we had a very interesting call earlier from a policeman who made the point that he deals with crazy people all the time, and most of them are not a threat to anybody else, anybody but themselves. It's not part of the MO exactly. He was saying his experience in law enforcement, and it's certainly mirrored by my experience as a reporter all my life, I've covered a lot of crime news, is that the vast majority of the people he saw and that I've seen doing violent, evil acts are not crazy. And I don't know who their parents were, but I know they're bad. They're bad to the bone. And they like being bad. Bad guys like their work. Bad guys kind of belong to bad guy associations. You know, they hang out with other bad guys. They go to the bad guy bar on Saturday morning and they say, "Oh man, last night I got paid. I spent all my money gambling and on hookers. I went home and beat up my wife in front of the kids." And everybody else at the bad guy bar says, "Hey, way to go, man. Yeah, so that's great. You're right in there." So they have these reinforced values from the bad guy community. And that's way more of how that stuff works than some kind of complicated psychiatric explanation. As a number of our callers have pointed out, this stuff gets especially tricky when you get into the matter of race and ethnicity, because a white dominant culture has way more of a tendency to come up with these psychiatric excuses and these parenting excuses for their own kids, for white kids, than they do for black kids. If a black kid on the south side of Chicago belongs to a gang and he shoots 5 kids in the other gang, how often do people say, "Well, he must have been autistic"? You don't hear that word. People just say, "Oh, he's a gang kid. He's no good, lock him up." And I think there are a lot of instances where lock him up is probably the right answer, but it's the right answer just as often for the white middle class kids as for any other kinds of kids, and that's a fact that's absolutely not even controversial, proven by the science and the numbers and the kind of rigorous studies that have been done. So this started out as a conversation about Newtown, and I should end it by saying that obviously I have no idea what happened there. That guy may have been taking his orders from the man in the moon. We don't know what happened there. We don't know what happened in Aurora. We have no idea. I also talked about Columbine and about this new book, which sounds really interesting to me, by Andrew Solomon, called "Far from the Tree," about the parents of the murderers in the Columbine incident. In all of those incidents, we don't know exactly what happened. I'm just saying that what they illustrate, however, if you look at the media reaction and the public reaction, the sort of pop culture reaction is that we have this huge tendency to want to jump around the moral explanation, to simply eliminate, without even going there, the possibility of evil. And why do we do that when evil, in fact, is the explanation for the vast majority of violent crime, of crime itself? These things take place on a moral matrix. We live in a moral universe. Why do we have this reflexive tendency to want to ignore morality when we're trying to explain these inexplicable incidents in the culture? And I want to thank the callers who called in to share today. These are tough issues, especially when we talk about young people. It's very, very painful when we think of the loss of young life, and we think about the horror of the young lives gone wrong in the case of the killers. You know, how could that happen? Why would that happen? But as our one caller who was a law enforcement person pointed out, and I think he's speaking honestly and from personal experience, it does happen. It happens all the time. It's what you see. It's part of our reality, and we don't do ourselves any favors. We don't come to grips with that reality when we reflexively dance around the moral spectrum. This has been Jim Schutze with Get Off My Lawn. We'll see you again here next Saturday, 10 a.m., and we'll talk about something even more cheerful. Who knows? Nice talking to you this week, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
You're listening to KNON 89.3 FM in Dallas, the voice of the people, voted best radio station for music 2 years in a row by the Dallas Observer.
Did you know that KNON podcasts all of its local talk shows? KNON has local talk, each show covering your community in its own unique way. So if you missed one of our great morning talk shows, you can go back and listen to it online. We keep the shows for 2 months so you can hear everything you have been missing out on. Visit KNON.org for more information about the KNON Morning Talk Shows podcast, also available on iTunes.